Philosophy can hurt, but it can also turn out to be salutary. A gadfly may sting you out of your complacency. A tough bout of boxing may sharpen your attention to the game. Even the hammer's smashing of your icons may lead to unnecessary fasting. And a hard-hitting refutation may teach you to choose your arguments more carefully. Such was the impact of Parmenides. For the Elenkos was hard-hitting indeed. It refuted any denial of being, hence all genesis and olathros, coming to be and ceasing to be, hence all change, all time, and replaced the fragile world of appearances it had shattered with a single, whole, logically impregnable sphere. Parmenides himself viewed this progress as a descent into darkness, and saw light as the illegitimate second element that riddled men's senses and made them stray from the one true path of judging by the Logos alone. And so the light of the kind of natural inquiry practiced by the Milesians, which declared but did not consistently respect the primacy of sensory evidence, seemed quenched. Actually, the challenge posed by the canon of no becoming, that is Cornford's phrase, forced the scientifically inclined into greater argumentative rigor, at the very least to the extent that henceforth change and creation and destruction could not just be assumed as conceptual pieces that came with the metaphysical game. They had to be argued for, and that means that a mechanism had to be found that could account for them and be described in the terms of a lower explanatory level. So Parmenides has left us in the domata nuktos. But Leucippus, Democritus, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, all of them were sharpening their flintstones, and Anaxagoras struck first, and the sparks were dazzling and disorientating. So first things first, how do we know that Anaxagoras was reacting to Parmenides? The backcloth against which Anaxagoras' ideas can be picked out may just as well be the neutral darkness of his own previously undisturbed ignorance, as Parmenides' logical night. So it is worth seeing how both Empedocles and Anaxagoras are reacting to one thesis in particular. Empedocles thinks it important to state, there is growth, phusis, of no one, of all mortal things, nor end in baneful death, but only mingling and separation of things mingled. Anaxagoras takes a strikingly similar view. Nothing comes to be or ceases to be, but rather it is mingled together out of the things that are, and is separated again. There are several other such conspicuous evasions of the canon of no becoming, whose flip side is the canon of no ceasing, in both philosophers. Why were they so wary of these principles? Well, the only argument against genesis and olathros surviving from an earlier time is that of Parmenides, which culminates, hence genesis is extinguished, and olathros is unintelligible. There is no other original argument to that effect in any of the fragments of Empedocles or Anaxagoras, nor any indication that we have lost one. Hence Anaxagoras was reacting to a thesis of Parmenides, the rest of whose conclusions follow with remarkable logical tightness and force, and Anaxagoras was joined in this reaction by at least one other philosopher, Empedocles. This reaction did not, of course, try to contradict Parmenides on his own terms. The refutation was too hard-hitting for that. Instead, it yielded to Parmenides and sought to carry on as best it could the endeavor of Ionian natural inquiry. In practice, Anaxagoras' contribution had to surreptitiously contradict Parmenides in two places, without argument, in order to make any progress. The first sleight-of-hand counter-assertion Anaxagoras made was to postulate an original plurality of things that are, eonta kremata. This seems to accord well with Parmenides, given that these being things are eternal, and thus engage in no disreputable genesis or olathros. In fact, Parmenides knew that no plurality could be described, hence in his terms conceived, without the concept not. That is why he held the pure monist view that there is only one thing. But Anaxagoras simply overlooked that and hoped we would overlook it too. Similarly, he seems to have permitted the idea of motion in space. But Parmenides also knew that space, and therefore motion, was impossible to express or imagine. They were the same to Parmenides, without the outlawed not. Again, Anaxagoras has forgotten Parmenides, or hopes that we have, and we might have, were it not for Simplicius. In any case, Anaxagoras has slipped two limbs free of Parmenides' logical chains. A plurality of things and motion can now be postulated. The rest of the physical theory of Anaxagoras can be deduced from these two postulates, along with the ever-watchful canon of no becoming and no ceasing. But exactly how this was done has, shall we say, occasioned debate. There are 5 big argumentative pieces which Aristotle and Simplicius attribute to Anaxagoras. They are as follows. First, our old ontological stalwart, no becoming. For nothing comes to be, nor ceases to be, says Anaxagoras, but is compounded and separated from things that are. Second, infinite divisibility. Anaxagoras seems to have thought that you can carry on dividing something and never reach a stage where there is nothing more to divide. If you are cutting up a sausage with a kitchen knife, you can cut it in half, then into quarters, then into eighths, and so on. Eventually, you will reach a stage when you won't be able to divide anymore, because you won't be able to slice through the super thin cross sections of sausage that you have with your moderately sharp kitchen knife. That is the fault of the kitchen knife, and in most cases, the main obstacle that stands in the way of our dividing beyond a certain point is technological. Anaxagoras' point is logical. Nothing but our clumsy bigness prevents the wafer-thin sausage being divided again and again and again. And that is presumably why Anaxagoras does not say, you can carry on dividing something forever. Man's mortality will spoil that formulation as much as man's clumsiness. Instead, Anaxagoras says, there is no smallest part of what is small, but there is always a smaller, irrespective of our own problems with evasive slices of wurst. And however far we follow our division of the sausage in our imagination, Anaxagoras denies that there will ever come a point where there is an ultimate, atomic, that is, uncuttable level of smallness, which we could, so to speak, strip away to reveal nothing. Anaxagoras' objection to that will be clear. Such an imaginative journey would be nothing less than an alternative way of trying to reach the boundaries of the universe and to break into unutterable nothing. That is perhaps the reasoning he would have expected a contemporary lover of wisdom to fill out from the compressed phrase with which he follows up his statement of the principle of infinite divisibility. For it is impossible that what is should cease to be. Togad eon uk esti tome uk einai. That is, something that exists cannot be divided out of existence. But Anaxagoras may well have had a different train of thought going. He may have meant that last cryptic phrase thus: for it is impossible that what is should cease to be what it is, and become something else. If that seems contrived, remember that Parmenides has already linked ceasing to be and qualitative change in the same condemned cargo of unutterable concepts. Let us return to our sausage. On this alternative reading, Anaxagoras would be saying that however many times you divide or could conceivably divide the sausage, what you would get would not only be something, would not only be nothing, it would always be sausage and would never not be sausage. This seems obvious. You have been following modern biology, chemistry, or physics very closely. For we imagine that if you divide a sausage into ever smaller pieces, you will reach a stage where you are dividing sausage into things which aren't sausage. You will be dividing sausage into protein, lipids, skin, and blood cells, dividing these into complex molecules and amino acids, dividing these into carbon and phosphorus atoms, dividing these into protons and electrons, then top quarks and bottom quarks, and so on. We've come a long way through a large number of non-sausageous things. Anaxagoras thinks this is inconceivable, and his division of the sausage would pass from sausage clumps to sausage molecules, to sausage atoms, to proton-sized bits of sausage, to quark-sized bits of sausage, sausage all the way down. I like this reading of fragment 3 because it accords well with another one of Anaxagoras' 5 main principles, homoeomereity. But that comes later. The third big argumentative piece may be called universal mixture. Kerford called it that. In everything there is a share of everything, says Anaxagoras. En panti pantos moira enesti. In contrast to my discussion of infinite divisibility, I will refrain from drawing out any of the many possible interpretations of this phrase here. That is because it is this phrase which causes the most trouble. It is so immediately provoking that we rush in to offer a reading which makes it more sensible, without first seeing whether it is not quite sensible enough as it stands, along with Anaxagoras' other main arguments. Fourthly, predominance. Things are as they are, Anaxagoras seems to have believed, because they contain a predominant quality of themselves. That is, a sausage is a sausage because it contains more sausage than it contains apples and diamonds. Each single thing is and was most plainly those things of which there are most in it, says Anaxagoras. We can distinguish a hard version, where the sausage in the sausage has to be greater than the apples, diamonds, and walruses put together, and a soft version of this doctrine, where the sausage in the sausage has to be greater than the apples, or the diamonds, or the walruses taken separately. It seems to have no great effect in the interpretation which option is preferred. The fifth and final central argument may be called homoeomereity. Anaxagoras thought that things are made of parts which are like one another and also like the whole. Such parts are referred to as homoeomere by Aristotle. The term is Aristotle's, and the theory does not seem to be straightforwardly present in any of the fragments of Anaxagoras. But this is a doctrine consistently attributed to him by both Aristotle and Simplicius. These, therefore, are the 5 central theories of Anaxagoras: no becoming and no ceasing, infinite divisibility, universal mixture, predominance, and homoeomereity. What's the problem? What has led so many writers to try to reformulate theories which they held to be inconsistent? One powerful objection was that of Cornford, who detected a contradiction between the principles of homoeomereity and of universal mixture. He argued that a natural substance cannot, 1, consist solely of parts that are like one another and like the whole, and 2, consist of portions of many other substances, indeed of every other substance at the same time. That seems common sense, but reflection will show that Cornford is wrong. There is no logical inconsistency in combining the principles of homoeomereity and universal mixture. We can, to begin with at least, recognize that there is no impossibility in combining homoeomereity and mixture. If I make a punch for a party out of 3 or 4 ingredients, then that punch is a mixture. Same would be true of a soup. But if I then share it out to my guests, the punch remains punch, no matter how many cupfuls are scooped. The punch contains only a small number of ingredients, but we can up the number of things being mixed without leaving the kitchen by returning to the idea of a soup, a wholesome vegetable soup consisting of many different vegetables, all put in the blender and mashed into a homogeneous substance. And again, if I am eating with my brother, there can be 2 portions of soup. If my parents join us, we may serve 4 bowls of soup. If we have others, a family of 4, say, we can divide this soup into 8, and at no stage will it be less soupy or mixed than it was at first. Once the examples have been grasped, it will be seen that there is no logical obstacle to conceiving of a universal mixture as a homoeomerous thing. And this indeed is what Anaxagoras did think. Everything has a share in everything, and the parts of everything are like each other and like the whole. That is what the evidence says, and there is now one less reason for not taking it at face value. Another objection would have it that, given homoeomerity and universal mixture, both will break down because of extraction. Think of the process of digestion. If I am digesting a piece of bread, Anaxagoras seems to believe that there is hair in that bread that will go towards the growth of my own hair if I eat it. How do I get the hair out of the bread? If I take some of the bread's hair, that will mean that I have taken hair from some parts of the bread, but not from others. But then that means that there will be some parts of the bread which have less hair than others. So the parts will be dissimilar and the bread will no longer be homoeomerous. The other option fares no better. If I manage to extract an equal amount of hair from each part of the bread, rather in the way that water evaporates equally from all parts of the surface of a lake, then there will be no threat to homoeomerity. But unless I stop extracting hair from the bread before I have extracted all of it from the bread, there will be a violation of the principle of universal mixture. For if there is more hair left in the bread, then there is one thing in the universe, bread, which does not have a portion of another thing, hair, in it. But the objection is based on an incomplete view of the evidence. For the principle of infinite divisibility states that any substance can be divided indefinitely, and hence that it will have an infinite number of parts. Hence, no matter how much hair is extracted from bread, there will still be an infinite number of parts of hair there. So the objection founders on the principle of infinite divisibility. And there are other objections with similar answers. But it can be stated here that there is no logical incoherence as far as Anaxagoras' central tenets are concerned. These are the principles salvaged from the destructive impact of Parmenides' elenkos. We must curtail discussion of these to glance briefly at how Anaxagoras ventured again to shed a more Ionian light on the creation and growth of the things we see about us. For anyone familiar with Parmenides, growth is a problem in that it involves change, even only change in mass. Set aside all the structural alterations that are often the concomitant of growth. The Scholiast tells us that the living germ contains in undifferentiated quantities all the homoeomerous tissues that appear in the developed organism, and they become distinct as they grow. It could be argued that these seeds or germs are another concept that Anaxagoras has simply smuggled into his system, past the watchful guardsman of no becoming and no ceasing, and that Anaxagoras expects us simply to accept that they work like seeds, both vegetable and animal, work in the world, and not ask for any mechanism to explain how they work. But the growth of life forms can be explained upon deeper Anaxagorean principles. Anaxagoras' physics is, as it were, a first past the post physics. In politics, if, say, the Labour Party gets the most votes in a constituency, they alone are represented, irrespective of how many votes the Conservatives or the Liberal Democrats have won. So with Anaxagoras' system, a piece of gold is gold if there is more gold in it than anything else, irrespective of how many bananas and rhinoceroses there are inside of it. The world can be conceived of as a briny substance saturated with every possible thing, with every possible quality, and yet we only perceive the things or qualities which have reached a certain critical mass of perception and have been elected, so to speak, to represent the world of essential particles to the phenomenal world. Now, if the emergence of phenomena depends upon a certain concentration of particles being reached in the conceptually underlying soup, it follows that a change in that concentration can make phenomena come into being. Although, of course, what is called coming into being is just mingling and separation. But does Anaxagoras ever mention that the universe's liquid essence is in motion? He does. For the growth of life forms should be considered together with the development of the universe. The universal mixture had been, Anaxagoras seems to have thought, motionless for some time. Then at some moment, nous, mind, initiated a swirling motion, a perichoresis, in which only a small part of the mixture was involved. That eddy is continually spreading and drawing ever more particles into the phenomenal world from the surrounding unlimited mass. Here I want to do no more than suggest that the ambiguity many scholars have found in fragment 12 has a simple solution, or a simple root. Mind, in the sense of supreme mind, has to do the same job on a large macrocosmic scale that mind, in the sense of my mind and your mind, has to do in the everyday world. And that is to draw substances into the world of phenomena by causing critical masses to be surpassed wherever its notice and attention focuses. Such is Anaxagoras' scientific answer. But as Aristotle complained, his use of mind still feels like a ghost imported into the machine, a deus ex machina. Perhaps to this extent he was a flash in the pan after all.